A coronavirus test which can give results in 20 minutes is being trialled in the United Kingdom as the country's cases continue to soar. If successful, it could make a significant difference in testing rates. Live to Euronews reporter Trent Murray in London, as we always do this time on a Saturday. Good morning to you, Trent, or good evening to you there. When does this trial begin, my friend?
Yeah, good morning, Tim. It's been a big week of announcements by way of testing. That test you mentioned there is a new test to be able to catch the coronavirus within 20 minutes. We expect the trial to begin next week with around 6,000 people taking part. And if it's successful, then there's real hope it could kind of revolutionise the way the UK can get back to business. There's talk of things like the English Premier League maybe using it to test players before they go on the pitch, or hospital staff as well being able to take a test to very quickly determine whether they can keep working in the health system or have to go home and self-isolate. That test was also announced around the same time that the Health Minister here, Matt Hancock, said that the UK would be bringing in 10 million new antibody tests that would be given out to members of the public. Staff in nursing homes and hospitals are going to get the priority, but the antibody test again is being used to try and work out just how many people may have already had the coronavirus and who out of that group may be eligible to start emerging again back into the economy. Of course, the UK has been under lockdown now for, well, it will be approaching 3 months. They are quite keen to try and release those people from their homes and get things moving again. What's
the latest from the statistical front with regards to cases, testing, flattening, and look, there's still a lot of cases, aren't there, in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, there is. I mean, 351 was the figure today of people that have died because of the coronavirus. It notches us up to almost 37,000, which puts the UK still in second place in the world. However, Brazil and Russia are now creeping up on them. Of course, not that it's a race by any means, but the UK for a long time was number 2. It looks like that place may be bumped. The infection rate, though, it's important to note, is flattening. The chief science officer here said that for about the past week it has been around 0.7 and 1. Now, keeping that infection rate below 1 was one of the key tests that Boris Johnson announced in terms of trying to relax lockdown measures. He said if he could consistently keep that number below 1, then we'd be in a good place to try and start opening the UK up again. But still some way to go. Again, as we've spoken so many times on this program, Tim, it is the country's nursing homes that are still really adding to that daily death toll.
I think a lot of Australians are confused because obviously there's a great link between us and the United Kingdom as to why only now has this 14-day quarantine rule come in, like it's been here for months.
Yeah, well, I think it's not just Australians asking that question. A number of very prominent commentators have asked that exact same question today as the UK announced this 14-day quarantine measure. People like Piers Morgan have really been on the attack on the government, saying this is about 3 months too late and it's kind of pointless. I mean, it's worth noting the government is obviously taking some scientific advice. We had been expecting this quarantine measure to come in. Boris Johnson prefaced it about 2 weeks ago during his address to the nation, but we got confirmation this afternoon. Priti Patel, the Home Secretary here, she said June 8th would be the day that people coming into the UK, both foreigners and British nationals, would have to quarantine themselves for 14 days. There's a fine of almost 2,000 Australian dollars for anyone caught breaching that. We understand that border officials and health officials will do spot checks. There are a few exemptions. Truck drivers are one of those groups, people having to bring in food and other essential freight, doctors and scientists working on coronavirus, and also fruit pickers, Tim. The UK really relies heavily on international labour for its summer harvest of fruit and vegetables. There's concerns there's not enough people to be able to go to the fields this summer and that a lot of that produce could go to rot. So an exemption there for those workers.
Are you seeing an air of frustration in the people of the UK?
Weather's been very warm again this week, Tim. Of course, summer is getting closer, and that's meant that people are starting to venture out of their homes a lot more. And I think some of that is based on built-up frustration. I mean, the beaches here were very busy over the last couple of days. It's a long weekend here now, so the councils around some of those beachside towns are really bracing themselves for huge crowds. Last weekend, I covered a protest for Euronews here in central London, people out protesting against the lockdown measures. I mean, it was only a couple of hundred people, but you could see that there was frustration there. With the infection rate falling, I suspect the government is now looking at how it can maybe bring in some more relaxed measures, because it is getting warmer. People are locked up in their homes. It's been a good couple of months now, and they're also looking across the channel at their friends in Europe, and they are starting to be released from lockdown a little bit sooner than the Brits. So I think some of that frustration may start to manifest itself more and more.
Look, because of the nature of what's happened, it's been policy on the run right around the world. Another thing that I'm hearing back from friends of mine that live there is just the mixed messaging.
Well, I mean, exactly. For a really long time, we had messaging here saying stay home, protect the NHS, which is the health service here. That has now led to other problems that we're starting to hear about. One of the main charities here working on cancer said there's been a massive drop in people seeking help and support for potential cancer diagnoses. Cancer surgery has dropped off because people are really heeding that message and staying home. Now that messaging has switched to stay alert, which was a little bit more ambiguous, but it doesn't really tell you exactly what you can and can't do in terms of going out. And of course, I think the messaging as well, just around this quarantine measure, I really can't overstate how confusing it is in some ways for people, because 2-3 months ago, when these questions about quarantine were asked, the government said that it wasn't necessarily an effective strategy to try and stop the spread of coronavirus. Well, here we are now, 2.5 months down the track, a lot of people wanting to go on summer holidays, potentially to places like Portugal and Spain, and the government's now saying that this measure is necessary. So some frustration for people that may have booked summer holidays. It may look like they may not be able to go.
Well, when you think of London or any part of the United Kingdom, the pub culture, particularly in summer, because of the long twilights, people would be desperate, wouldn't they, to get out and enjoy what they normally do.
Yeah, one Australian reporter in London is very desperate for a beer right now, I must say. I have been watching some of those pictures coming from home, very thirsty. But yeah, the pubs still seem a little bit of a long way off opening. July 4th was the date mooted by Boris Johnson for the time that pubs and cafes could start to allow patrons in again. Some of the publicans, I think, are starting to get around some of the laws a little bit. There were some pictures, places like Brighton down on the ocean. A few pubs did cheekily open and were selling beer in plastic cups, takeaway for people on the beach. So some people got a cold, well, I don't know how cold it was, I must say. It's not always too cold here, but they got a little bit of a taste of beer, albeit in a plastic cup on the sand.
Yeah, I don't know how they drink that stuff. But look, finally, what's his report card looking like, Boris Johnson? Because he came in with an overwhelming mandate. I mean, he wasn't to predict what was going to happen.
No, it's quite right, and obviously for any Prime Minister, the real test of how their leadership is going is just how much they're being held to account by the opposition. And look, I have to say, it has really been a real change of tone coming from the Labor Party here. The new leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has really held Boris Johnson's feet to the flames during Prime Minister's questions here. He's managed to catch the Prime Minister out on a few things like figures around care homes, as well as what the advice was early on in this crisis. So there is some effective opposition, I must say, compared to where we were 6-12 months ago under Jeremy Corbyn, where Boris Johnson had a little bit of an easier ride. The opposition also scored a bit of a win this week. They had been pressing for a surcharge for foreign medical staff that was in place when they got a visa. They were pushing for that to be removed. Government held off on that, but then they did announce today that they would be removing that surcharge. So Boris Johnson clearly listening a little bit to some of that opposition coming across from the other side of the House.
Finally, Trent, do you think that the feel is that the UK is finally getting there? There's light at the end of the tunnel?
I think that is a fair assessment. Again, the UK is very much looking to its neighbours who are a few weeks ahead of it when it comes to this crisis. Places like Italy, Spain and Portugal, well, they're starting to open up a little bit more. Portugal, its foreign minister said that tourists are welcome again. He said that today. Italians have been back out on the streets having coffee and being able to eat out a little bit more. So the UK, I think, is starting to see that these national efforts to stay at home, to remain under lockdown, may be starting to pay off. Of course, it's not to say that there's not fears about a second wave, but one a positive piece of news, Tim. I know you've been following closely that trial at Oxford. Well, they're about to enter the second phase now of that vaccine research program. They're looking for around 10,000 volunteers over 55 to participate. It's sounding like there's some quite good news out of there. And the pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca that they've partnered with, they've said that if the vaccine is viable, they could produce up to 1 billion doses of it by the end of the year. So some positive news there if that research continues to remain on track.
Yeah, that's a really nice, bright way to finish. Trent, enjoy the rest of your weekend. We look forward to having a chat next Saturday morning.
Thanks, Tim.